to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers. And it is season 4, somehow, of Wrestling at Random. We've survived. We've made it through the first 3 seasons. If you're listening in linear fashion, we made it through episode 1 of season 4. And as we've done in previous seasons, particularly in season 3, everything is in the mix here in season 4. Pay-per-views, weekly television, big cards, whatever you can think of, it's in the mix. And not only that, the randomizer is bursting at the seams. More has been dumped in than ever before, and that has led us to even more wrestling to be able to watch.
That's right. Every week we fire up the randomizer. It randomly chooses a show for us to watch. And sometimes it's a pay-per-view, like week 1 of season 4. We watched a TNA pay-per-view.
What a pay-per-view!
I did not bring enough bourbon to get me through the TNA show. But here, much more relaxed, much more enjoyable. This was an hour television program. The program we're talking about, NWA Pro Wrestling, from October 8th, 1988. So
I would say this definitely falls into the proof of concept, or proving that this show is in fact random. We'll get into this. Like, this is an enjoyable hour of television, but it is one of those shows that if someone was faking the randomizer and coming up with different shows to watch, you would never in a million years have picked this show. So yes, the randomizer, to paraphrase Seinfeld, is both real and spectacular.
Yeah, this episode, October 8th, 1988. It's the day before my 9th birthday.
There you go.
So the day before my 9th birthday, this show aired. And the difference here, the NWA Pro Wrestling show, the difference with this show is that not a studio show. This is from an arena. So a totally different vibe than the normal World Championship Wrestling studio shows we'd see from TBS.
Yeah, I would say it's somewhat similar in vibe to the Worldwide show that we reviewed. Well, yeah. I guess technically it was only one match on that show because it was the entire episode. The Ric Flair Barry Windham NWA World Title match from 1987,
which I believe is episode 1 of the bonus content.
That it is.
If you're not a Patreon subscriber or subscriber through your Apple Podcast feed, that bonus content is waiting for you right now. You could hear us recap Ric Flair versus Barry Windham for the world title from Worldwide back in episode 1.
But, what a match and what a podcast that was. To me, the only difference really between this and that episode of Worldwide, and I feel like if I'm going back in my memory of being a 7-year-old watching the NWA religiously as I did back then, that Pro, at least then, didn't have quite as many marquee matches as Worldwide did. It was not a studio show, but the format of the show felt much more like a studio show that happened to be taking place in an arena, than a Worldwide Wrestling where you usually got, at least one relatively marquee match. Obviously that Flair Windham match was an aberration. But yeah, it definitely has a different feel being in an arena with, an arena crowd.
Yeah. And a lot of the, I mix up my experience watching NWA Pro Wrestling with Main Event with Worldwide, right? Like those shows kind of all run together for me. They don't stand out as much. Also,
in Chicago, we had, starting in, I believe, 1990, maybe it was even 89, but I believe it was in 1990, we had a special version of WCW Pro called WCW Pro Chicago, which aired on WGN. Most of the time, it was just Tony Schiavone on the call. They would do kind of Chicago-specific cut-ins. It was commentary that was specifically done for that show, where you get a lot of local Chicago sports references from Tony Schiavone. And we even had a Jack Brickhouse segment, the legendary former Chicago Cubs announcer, and a million other things, including pro wrestling. But there's the Brickhouse bonus, where he would opine about wrestling of yesteryear. So that was another thing to throw into the mix. It was funny though, as I was watching this, I had the same thought you did, just kind of remembering like, my God, the NWA/WCW had so many shows back then. They were all a little bit different, and they were all kind of presented as being at a similar level. None of them were really like a B show where you didn't see a Ric Flair promo or you didn't get a Sting squash match. I mean, we see those things here on this show. You would get that on the TBS show on Saturday. You get stuff like that on the Power Hour, on Main Event, on Worldwide. It was quite the suite of television they had back then.
Yeah, a lot of syndicated shows here, and mostly all on the weekends, Saturdays and Sundays.
Yes.
So.
Oh yeah, and mostly, I mean, you had Saturday night or just World Championship Wrestling, as it was known. In our time zone, Central Time Zone, 5:05. You had Main Event the same time the following night, 5:05. You had the Power Hour, which was a late night show. Then that went to being, I believe, either 6:05 or 5:05 in the morning on Saturdays, because I remember waking up super early to watch those. And then you had these syndicated shows Saturday, Sunday morning.
Yeah, I mentioned it in the World Championship Wrestling episode we reviewed here in the free feed that it's how I learned time zones was because I'd ask my parents, 6:05 Eastern, 5:05 Central, what time is this show on? and I was educated that we are in the Central Time Zone here, so it's -1 hour from the Eastern time. So
it was also amusing the 05 starts on TBS. Like, as a kid, I thought that was like a real thing and not just a TBS thing. And so that always, kind of threw me off. Kind of like, I think I've told the story on the podcast before, but how when I was very young and, you had Jim Neidhart and Bret the Hitman Hart, they were tag team partners and they were presented as being cousins, I believe, in storyline. And so I, as a young child, thought that Nide in front of your last name meant that was you were the other person's cousin. Again, completely illogical, but as like a 4-year-old, that's what that meant in my mind. Gotta love wrestling.
Well, this wrestling show opens with your United States champion, Barry Windham, and he's calling out Sting. He's out there with J.J. Dillon, and J.J. Dillon's making fun of Sting. He's beating his chest.
Oh, this promo is great. Are you playing this, or is this
I am not? No.
Okay, well, good thing I took notes then, because J.J. Dillon was at his best here. First, we have Barry Windham, saying he's always defended the U.S. title. If Sting wants a shot, he needs to just show up instead of sucking down a beer, celebrating a win over nobody, which I thought was a good line. Then JJ jumps in and just screams, "You're inept!" at Sting, even though Sting isn't out there. He's freaking out. He's beating his chest. He says that Sting is, quote, sassy and cocky, unquote. And how Sting howls to an empty parking lot after shows.
And as he's ranting about Sting, we just hear JJ yell, "Holy!" And then he trails off as he moves away from the microphone.
So great.
And Sting at that moment hits the ring and attacks Windham to a huge ovation from the crowd. Sting is popular, and this was a great hot way to start the show. And we cut to Bob Caudle and Jim Ross, who welcome us to the arena.
Yeah, well, just to kind of put a bow on that, Sting does make physical contact with Barry Windham. He starts punching him. He hits a big back body drop. And so we've got a hot open to this show. I mean, it's a cold open in the sense that we just go straight to the ring. But this is a significant development here right at the beginning of Worldwide. And really, it will be the most significant thing that happens on the show as we go through. But a really cool, fun way to start. And then, as you said, we get the open, and we have Jim Ross and Bob Caudle. And this makes me so happy because Jim Ross is, this era of Jim Ross, for my money, the best play-by-play guy in the history of pro wrestling. Just tremendous in every conceivable way. And then Bob Caudle is just the warmest, kindest, most legitimately joy-filled, borderline elderly man you'll ever hear. He really in so many ways, and I think we've talked about this before on a pay-per-view that he did color commentary on, he really is AEW Dynamite Tony Schiavone on this show. He's just the guy that's been around forever, still loves pro wrestling, and is in awe of everything. He's a more polished and more likable, warmer version of David Crockett is the way I would describe his commentary here.
Yeah, and then we see him, occasionally in some of the older Mid-South or Mid-Atlantic episodes, and he's a totally fine play-by-play guy in those episodes as well. So,
which was a bit of a revelation, I think, for both of us. If you didn't get Mid-Atlantic TV or you didn't watch it a whole lot compared to some of the other territories, your idea of what Bob Caudle was is much more of what we have here than what we saw in that Mid-Atlantic show. And he did a great job there, which I believe that in season 2 or season 3.
I think we've had a couple, but nowhere near as many as friend of the show Mike Sempervive has done over at the Mid-Atlantic Pod. If you want to do a deeper dive there, highly recommend that show.
A great podcast and an even better Twitter account, dare I say.
Absolutely. Bob Caudle and Jim Ross tell us that Bam Bam Bigelow will make his NWA debut on this show, which I'm excited for. I'm a huge fan of Bam Bam Bigelow. I definitely was at this point. I earlier in this calendar year of 1988, back in March or April of '88, when the WrestleMania 4 took place, Bam Bam Bigelow was in that tournament, and he was one of my favorites. Him and Ricky Steamboat and the Macho Man. Loved me some Bam Bam Bigelow. So definitely excited.
As a kid, I mean, obviously as an adult as well, but as a kid, here comes this big, heavy guy that flies around the ring. He's got flames tattooed on his head. His gear is just a giant fire bodysuit.
It was great. Yeah.
He absolutely jumped off the screen as a kid, even in this era of larger than life characters. I thought it was interesting, and maybe this is just like a sign of the times, and this was, the conservative mid to late 80s. But Bob Caudle kept going so hard on how bizarre of an individual Bam Bam Bigelow was. And to me, that's reserved for your like Undertaker or your Mankind, like your borderline creepy supernatural type of character. I don't know that I would describe Bam Bam Bigelow as bizarre. He's just a big, mean, scary looking dude. So he kept going in on that. So I was amused a bit by that. The other thing that I found somewhat amusing at the open is that Bob Caudle tells us there are questions about the physical condition of Jimmy Garvin. Jim Ross then basically says that Jimmy Garvin is day to day. This is the only and last time we will hear anything about Jimmy Garvin or his physical condition.
Well, he mentioned he's in a cast. He's in a cast too, or a boot or something.
So I'm guessing that something happened on last week's episode of this TV show, so they felt the need to reference it, but it wasn't important enough to recap anymore, bring up, talk about what was going to happen. It just kind of sat there and was not mentioned the rest of the show.
We cut to Tony Schiavone, who's there to interview the world's champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. This promo I will go ahead and cut in.
Thank you very much, Jim Ross, Bob Caudle. We are with the World Heavyweight Champion. As you know, the World Champion, the U.S. Champion, Barry Windham, together as members of the Four Horsemen. And now, when you talk about the total package, Lex Luger, he has a friend of his own by the name of Sting.
First of all, you talk about Barry Windham and Ric Flair. You clearly are talking about the two best wrestlers in the world today. Bottom line, Barry Windham, Ric Flair, James Dillon, that is a dynasty unto its own. Nothing else makes it go. We are at I am your World Heavyweight Champion, Barry Windham, the U.S. Heavyweight Champion, and together we represent the elite and the greatest sport in the world. Now, Sting, my friend, you have made the mistake of walking that aisle and sticking your nose in my business once again. Think back, Sting. Last time you got my business, you got hurt. You paid the price. Luger and Ric Flair have got their own thing. Stay out of it. But, pal, if you want to get with Luger, you want a tag team match, you want a hot building on a hot night anywhere in the world, put it on a contract. Because Barry Windham, Ric Flair, the Four Horsemen, James Dillon, we are the dynasty in this sport. And as I've said before, whether you like it or you don't like it, learn to love it. Woo! Because it is the best thing going today.
The world champion, the Nature Boy. Let's go back to the ring.
And that's Ric Flair.
Well, the sad thing is that
on this show, like, but that's like you mentioned, having the world's champion make an appearance on the show gives it a bigger vibe when it's just a bunch of squash matches.
Yeah, it gives it a feel of importance. If I had to guess, and I don't know for sure, I would imagine that both Pro and Worldwide were probably taped during the same tapings, because you would have to have a show that had some bigger matches on it, I would assume, to get a crowd, and also, for it to be necessary for Ric Flair to be there. It is sad, however, that the audio that you presented to the listeners cannot convey the magnificence of Tony Schiavone's late 1988 mustache.
No, it is
it's a look,
fantastic.
as the kids say.
We go to the ring for our first in-ring action of the show. It's Larry Stevens taking on Sting. And Sting, very popular. People love them some Sting.
It's Rat Tail era Sting, by the way, where it's the near end of the Rat Tail era / like the blonde dyed hair, but then the bottom part isn't dyed. It's also, if you're overly pedantic as I am about gear, it's that era of Sting gear where he has the sort of, it's not a belt around the top of the tights, but there's the different color around the top of the tights, which went away pretty much, I would say, by the time we got into 1989. So this is still early Sting. It's a very quick squash match. Like, he literally just hits a Stinger splash.
Well, no. First, before the Stinger splash, he backs Stevens in the corner and then hits some chest strikes.
Yeah.
So he's hitting him with his chest and then sends him to the corner. Stinger splash, puts on the Scorpion Deathlock, and it's over less than a minute for sure.
Those are basically like short Stinger splashes in the corner, those chest bumps before he hits the actual Stinger splash, Scorpion Deathlock, and gets the win. The thing that is very notable to me is that, like, it's not like Sting, even in 90 or 91, was a great promo. It was later in his career when he became a really, really good promo, but he was much better than he would be here. He was still trying to figure out who he was as a character. If you remember, wasn't there an NWA studio show that we reviewed where he cut this weird promo where he was going in and out of like California surfer voice?
Yeah.
He was still doing that a little bit here. And the other thing was that he had not quite decided how he was going to do his version of the woo, scream, yell thing that he would become his signature years later. Here he does it, but it's like mixed with this hyena cackle.
Yeah, it's more of just like almost like a scream than the ow that he would do like before. Like
a scream laugh. It didn't work. He was clearly workshopping things still at this point. But again, we talk about guys jumping out of the TV screen. Sting, even in 1988, just incredible charisma and just physical presence.
He talked about teaming up with Lex Luger. They had won the Crockett Cup, and Lex Luger and Sting were going to team up to take on the Four Horsemen incarnation of Ric Flair and Barry Windham.
Yeah, that's kind of the theme throughout this show. And again, this is still, even though we're in the late 80s, this is still the era of weekly TV, more building up what you might see in your arena, in your town, at a house show, rather than building up a pay-per-view. But the idea throughout this is, yes, Ric Flair and Barry Windham, who are the Horsemen, But there are not 4 horsemen right now because Arn and Tully have left to go to the WWF. So they're calling them the Horsemen, but I noticed several times in that Ric Flair promo that you played earlier, he also called themselves the Dynasty. And while that was not like an official name, you could tell they were still trying to figure out what direction they were going to go with the Horsemen of J.J. Dillon, Barry Windham, and Ric Flair without having a 3rd and 4th horseman and really not knowing yet how they were going to get there.
The next match is The Nightmare taking on Dr. Death, Steve Williams.
It is not Cody Rhodes under that mask.
It is not. Is it Danny Davis? I don't think it is either. So
no,
this is a random nightmare here.
Well, this may be 1988 NWA. The number of jobbers or guys who should be jobbers in masks and lame gear is much more reminiscent of, I believe it was actually October 1989 Continental.
Continental, yeah. There's all the jobbers had masks on, yes, and
yes.
The Nightmare.
They clearly had access to a gym, which the Continental jobbers didn't. But otherwise,
yeah, these jobbers were, we like our jobbers to be out of shape, untrained, and wearing ill-fitting gear.
As I like to call them, spandex-clad bags of milk.
Yes, and here these guys were just like inexperienced actual wrestlers. So
you could believe that some of these guys could have gone on to be somebody. Like it's marginally believable, where absolutely not the case with those guys from Continental.
Kevin Sullivan, the Games Master, the Taskmaster. He's at ringside looking to add a new member to the Varsity Club roster, and he's scouting Dr. Death for that spot. Not the Nightmare, not a big varsity career for the Nightmare.
No,
Dr. Death in this squash here with a takedown. He's showing off a half Nelson. He's doing some amateur wrestling here, playing into the Varsity Club recruiting gimmick here.
The most noteworthy thing about this match isn't really the action in the ring. It's the foreshadowing of the surprise of Dr. Death Steve Williams eventually joining the Varsity Club, in that both Bob Caudle and Jim Ross are adamant that Dr. Death Steve Williams is not the type of guy that would ever join forces with someone as dastardly and diabolical as Kevin Sullivan.
Yeah, and in hindsight, he's a perfect fit. He puts on the Oklahoma Letterman's jacket, the
singlet,
and he's right there. Yeah, and the singlet. It's a no-brainer he's going to join. But yeah, JR was very adamant that Dr. Death would never do such a thing.
I was disappointed that Bob Caudle didn't call Kevin Sullivan a bizarre individual. That's
a bizarre individual.
Far more appropriate.
Very much so.
Than what we had here. The highlight of this brief match, granted it wasn't as brief as that Sting squash in the previous segment, but it was the running drop kick from Dr. Death Steve Williams. Can't say I expected that one.
No, the running drop kick got a big reaction from me. He then grabs him, hits the running power slam, also known as the Oklahoma Stampede.
This bothered me because they called it the Oklahoma Stampede. But my understanding and recollection of this move is that for it to be the Oklahoma Stampede, you need to run your opponent into the turnbuckles while in the power slam position and then go running back to the middle of the ring and hit the Stampede. I don't know. Maybe this was an early incarnation of what they called the Oklahoma Stampede.
Dr. Death is with Bob Caudle, and Bob Caudle asks him flat out, "Are you the new member of the Varsity Club?" And Dr. Death says that Sullivan wants him because he's about to become the television champion.
You were doing so much better of a job in this promo than Dr. Death Steve Williams did, and God love him. One of my favorite wrestlers. I did capture
the last line because the last line is where it really falls apart. But yeah, the last line, he goes, "I will carry that belt and everyone will be proud of me," and throws his hands up and walks away. Okay.
He threw his hands up as though legitimately realizing, wow, I was not able to come up with a line that I was trying to come up with, and I settled on this. Like, it's, you're on a date and you're trying to impress the person that you're going out with, and it's going well, and then you can feel yourself just saying something really dumb, not like offensive, but just dumb. Like, why would I tell this amazingly attractive person about the 300 wrestling figures that I have in my bedroom at home? Why would I say this? But it just comes out. And as you say it, you realize, wow, I can't take that back. That is the look that was on Dr. Death Steve Williams' face here. He also said that he invented the Varsity Club, which was odd and confusing. Yeah, this was a blinking red light, screaming to get this man a manager.
And now it's time for the debut of Bam Bam Bigelow with his manager, your favorite, Adam, Sir Oliver Humperdinck is here.
So
and
can you remind me, the previous show that we did, again, I can't remember whether it was on the free feed. I think it was on the free feed. Maybe it was on the bonus feed, but it was that maybe it was a Coliseum home videotape. I'm drawing a blank on which show it was, but it was the introduction of Bam Bam Bigelow into the WWF, and all the managers were vying for his services.
They were. It was one of the best. It was one of the best TV. It was on a prime time when they recapped that build up, where it was on every television show. Every manager was
all
like,
courting him. Slick,
I'm
Bobby
getting him.
Dean,
Yeah,
Jimmy
they
Hart.
all were going to get him. Yep.
And
then
wasn't it Oliver Humperdinck?
He went with Hump in WWF.
So not only did he go with Oliver Humperdinck in WWF, the future Big Daddy Dink took him all the way to the National Wrestling Alliance. I was shocked here. I had no recollection of this in the NWA. Babyface Bam Bam Bigelow being managed by Oliver Humperdinck. The other odd thing to me about this was Jim Ross was doing ring announcing for this match for some reason from the broadcast table, which was odd. Like, he was introducing him, and it was as an announcer, but it was being piped through to the main crowd, to the crowd actually in the arena. Also notable in that it's kind of, if you're not familiar with the NWA, I would say in some ways it's the NWA's answer to like a Barry Horowitz or a when Pez Whatley was sort of an upper tier jobber, or like a Jim Powers in the WWF. It's George South.
Yes, George South is that. Would you put Bob Cook in the George South tier of jobbers?
I would. I mean, Bob Cook has the best right hand in the history of professional wrestling. But George South, just a great jobber heel that also had sort of a successful indie career, and a regional career. But he's one of those guys. We'll see another one later in the Italian Stallion. Like George South and the Italian Stallion, I feel like we're on every NWA TV show back then, much like you go maybe 3-4 years later and Mark Starr was always that guy on NWA WCW, or I guess on WCW TV at that time, that you knew was better than the other jobbers but still couldn't get a win. That was George South.
Bam Bam starts with a cartwheel and a drop kick, and he's hitting all the high spots right away,
immediately making Dr. Death look bad by comparison, hitting a cartwheel into a drop kick. We have two big man drop kicks here on this 1988 television show.
And then in 1988 television show, we have Bam Bam throwing a super kick, which which we've got a little graphic in the corner if you're watching on the YouTube right now of Bam Bam hitting a super kick on George South, and then he hits an enziguri.
Beautiful enziguri.
This is perfect, and then a vertical suplex. He's holding him there, but instead of dropping back, he goes face first instead.
Arn Anderson style gourd buster here is the finish for Bam Bam Bigelow. The 396-pound Bam Bam Bigelow. I always get a chuckle when I hear the worked weights of wrestlers from back when I was watching wrestling as a kid. Like, anybody who was not like in great jacked shape was always over 300 pounds. That was the starting line for anyone with like more than 2% body fat.
I love Bam Bam Bigelow, and I watch this here, and anyone who watches this, how could Bam Bam not be one of your favorite wrestlers? Like, after you watch this, great in ring, just in a weird career. For Bam Bam. We covered a couple of his All Japan appearances as well.
He had a big,
and-
had a very good career in New Japan. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, Crusher, Bam Bam Bigelow teaming with Big Van Vader, IWGP Tag Team Champions. He had big wins over big stars in New Japan at a time where foreigners didn't really get those wins. So he was a guy right out of the gate, you know, that had something. Went a lot of places. You always kind of thought that he should have been a bigger deal than he was almost everywhere. His run in ECW was perfect. Like, you think of a big star that had been around for a while that then ended up having a big run in ECW. I can't think of a guy that was a better fit for that promotion and for that role than I guess it was probably a year or two that we got out of Bam Bam Bigelow there. So yeah, an interesting career,
yeah.
and I never mind seeing him here on this show.
No, I mean we saw him on that ECW show, and
Going through the ring,
the triple threat, and we saw all that angle, and that was great.
Him and Taz,
he was great in everything that he did, but always like came in to big fanfare in the U.S. and would flame out, pun intended, everywhere he went, and then but had the great run in Japan, had a great run in ECW. But never the world's champion, never got that big push.
Well, I think to sort of compare him to a modern TV wrestler that maybe some of the younger listeners or viewers would resonate with. In some ways, he kind of reminds me of Eddie Kingston. And granted, he hit the big time a lot sooner than Eddie Kingston. And not saying they're similar in terms of their style, but just guys that a lot of times, and they would admit it themselves, Eddie Kingston does, were their own worst enemies backstage, and that ended up keeping them from getting, you know, to the place that otherwise they maybe would have. The other thing I want to touch on, it doesn't have anything to do with Bam Bam Bigelow, but it is a fashion corner. It's not for a wrestler, it's for the ring. This, for my money, is the most beautiful setup for a wrestling ring, at least for a North American promotion. This is the green with blue accent apron for the NWA, with the NWA sort of like cable logo going down the side. I love that. I just think it's such a great look, and it's so different. It's classic, and it's not just the black or the dark blue apron. It's very identifiable. You know immediately where you are and what you're watching.
Jim Cornette is out for his Louisville Slugger interview segment.
What was with the production of this? He comes out, and for the first 30 to 40 seconds, he is in total darkness. Like, you see lights, they're not pointed toward him. It's this faraway camera shot. It's awful and looks so low rent, but that looks great compared to the most uncomfortable, odd-looking chairs I have ever seen in my life. They've got this huge, like, rounded back, but the actual seats are so narrow. I have no idea how these men actually sat in these chairs, how Jim Cornette and Oliver Humperdinck sat in these chairs. They're so narrow, and then they're this, like, wicker rattan sort of deal. It's incomprehensible that these were used on television, even in 1988. I don't care what was on the store, like on the floor at Pier 1 Imports in 1988. Doesn't matter. This is just horrific.
We did get to hear the classic Midnight Express theme song, not edited off of this viewing that we saw, and I love that. That
made me very, very happy.
So Hump says that him and Cornette are not friends. Cornette calls Bigelow a bodyguard for Humperdinck, but he says no, he's no bodyguard. He's looking for every title he can get his hands on, and he's got a partner in mind that will team up with Bigelow to go against the Midnight Express. Cornette tries to kick him out. The Midnight Express come out to back up Jim Cornette. There was a lot of people trying to form teams and partners because we discover along the way that the United States tag team titles are now vacant, and there will be a tournament for those titles later.
Yes, and the whole thing with this interview segment is it's Jim Cornette giving backhanded compliments to Oliver Humperdinck, calling him old, all these different things, but doing it in a way that he doesn't think Humperdinck is going to pick up on it, but he does. This was fine. I've seen better Jim Cornette interview segments. Granted, he didn't have a whole lot to work with here. Oliver Humperdinck is just, to use your language,
useless.
A total zero. Which
Zero. Yes.
We will see, though, a manager coming up who is like a -5 if Oliver Humperdinck is a 0. One of my least favorite TV characters from this time period. We'll get to it. Actually, I believe it's the very next segment, which, by the way, we go to this next segment, and this must have been really late in like a 5-hour or 6-hour marathon taping, because the crowd has really thinned out. Like, you can see swaths of empty spots on the bleachers opposite the hard camera.
The Russian Assassins with Paul Jones, who the manager that you were describing. Paul Jones.
It's Paul Jones. He's not out there in the Jerry Seinfeld puffy shirt. He instead is out there dressed like a cowboy, and he has a mustache. Why?
I am only entertained when Paul Jones does an incomprehensible promo. That is always entertaining, but just him at ringside is a 0. Yeah.
No, his promo, I mean, it's entertaining, but it's entertaining for all the wrong reasons.
Because it's bad. It's not because it's any good.
No.
Not because it's drawing any money or doing anything of adding anything of value other than me laughing at a guy who's crazy at his promos.
He's a manager who is so bad at being a manager that he would need another manager to not be bad on television. Like, he needs another manager to cut his promos for him when that's supposed to be his job. I will never understand Paul Jones' existence. I mean, it's fine because he's a jobber, he's a jobber manager managing glorified jobbers. I guess he's sort of the smart Mark Sterling of 1988.
Do you know who the Russian Assassins are?
Well, I know they're not Ivan and Nikita Koloff.
They are not.
They are feuding with Ivan and Nikita Koloff. This is somewhat of I guess you would have called this a groundbreaking storyline in 1988, in that it's evil Russians against good Russians.
Against good Russians.
Really see that often, and I don't think any of them are actually Russian.
Yes, the bad Russians, the Russian Assassins, are Jack Victory,
wow,
under the mask, and David Sheldon, who would wrestle as the Angel of Death.
Wow, it's really funny because the Angel of Death popped into my head when I was trying to think of guys from this era that would have actually been bizarre characters for Bob Caudle to mention. I can see one of them being the Angel of Death. Just the idea that either of these men were Jack Victory, given Jack Victory's body type, even like a year or two later, as part of the royal family with Rip Morgan, much less later on in his career. That's wow. I would not have expected that.
Their opponents are the Italian Stallion, who we mentioned earlier, and Joe Cruz. Now, the Koloffs do an inset promo here, Ivan and Nikita Koloff, where
it. I love Ivan Koloff on these shows, cutting promos with Nikita. Remember that awesome training video with Nikita, where Nikita like throwing Russian sickle clotheslines at, was it Ric Flair's head?
Taped to a heavy bag. Yeah,
taped to a heavy bag, and it's a darkened room. Such a great promo, great visual, from a promotion that wasn't necessarily known for doing those sorts of visual presentations. This inset promo is just, it's Ivan thanking Nikita for saving him. He's talking about the Russians. They accomplish their goals, but they do it without dignity. They'll suffer for this. And then he calls them treacherous man, which I loved.
Yeah, so apparently Paul Jones was the manager of the Koloffs. He was Ivan Koloff's manager. And Paul Jones recruited the two masked Russian assassins to feud with Nikita. However, the assassins and Jones turned on Ivan Koloff after he lost a Russian chain match to Ricky Morton at Clash of the Champions 3. And now a babyface, Ivan Koloff, reunites with his nephew, Nikita, to feud with these assassins.
So this is an early babyface Nikita Koloff. I mean, I guess they dabbled with that here and there, but yeah, it's just so weird to see. It's really weird, more so than babyface Nikita Koloff. Good guy Ivan Koloff, is
babyface
really,
Ivan
really
Koloff.
odd. Is really strange.
Yeah, so the assassins beat him down, not very spectacular fashion in doing so. The assassin, one of them loads up his mask with a weapon, hits a headbutt for the win. I do love when heels cheat for no reason because they're in control, beating up jobbers. There's no need to cheat, but they cannot
can't
help themselves.
They can't help themselves. They're just that detestable of human beings. They are, to quote a great man, they are treacherous man. This was them demonstrating that. I also loved how one of the nightmares or the assassins, whatever these guys were. I'm going to assume with the knowledge that I have now that this was the Jack Victory assassin. He hits what I would call the lazy man's double arm suplex, where you do the double arm suplex, but you do not go down to the mat with your opponent. It's like the Greg the Hammer Valentine suplex, where he doesn't actually take a bump. He just drops the guy, which I guess would be a body slam version of a jackhammer instead of the power slam jackhammer, the actual jackhammer where you go down with your opponent. I was amused by that. I was hoping actually you were going to tell me that this is Greg Valentine subbing for one of the assassins.
We've had a real good run here, Adam, of the randomizer not giving me any Greg the Hammer Valentine.
Shockingly, given the proliferation of Greg the Hammer Valentine throughout the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s, we had a lot of them in the first 2 seasons. There's been nary a Greg Valentine sighting in months.
Well, now you've said his name 3 times, and now he's going to appear, and the randomizer is it's going to show up here, and I'm going to be pissed because it's your fault.
For people that may be watching, if you're watching this on video, he's going to come through both of our doors at the same time, even though we are in different buildings.
Greg, that's a different. If you want to hear about our disdain for Greg the Hammer Valentine as a pro wrestler, go ahead and listen to any of season 1, 2, and 3. We definitely touch on.
I find him to be somewhat boring. You find him to be the most boring, offensively bad professional wrestler of all time.
The human intermission. Yes. Yes. But we'll save that for the next podcast that he shows up on. Next time I spin this randomizer and he shows up, I'm going to be, it's your fault. We were on a good run. And you had to mention
Greg Valentine hitting streak coming up. I feel it.
Barry Windham and JJ Dillon are back. They're interviewed by Tony Schiavone. Windham has with him that gorgeous U.S. title. That NWA U.S. title belt is one of my favorites. It looks great here.
He also, Barry himself, looks a bit more like polished and slick in terms of visual presentation than you usually get with him. He wasn't like full Ric Flair suits, but he's kind of got a bit of like a late 80s cool vibe to him, which isn't something you normally associate with Barry Windham. You think of him more as the the tall, tough cowboy type.
As cool as a tall cowboy with a French braid for his hair can actually look.
That was very impressive. Very impressive. It looked to be impeccably done. The best thing about this promo by far is when he completely nonsensically says, when referring to Lex, he calls him Fatso Luger.
No, incorrect.
Also, in this promo, JJ Dillon says that Ric Flair has held the world title for 7 years. Is this true? I don't believe Ric Flair was in the midst of a 7-year title reign at this point.
No, he definitely was not, because he didn't win until 83 from Harley Race.
Exactly.
All right, Dick Murdoch taking on David Isley. And
the famous Isley brothers.
He is not, and Dick Murdoch is back here in the NWA. He's kind of got that mercenary vibe where he just shows up, people hire him to join their team, and then he beats people up, and then he goes away.
Just shows up. He's Dick Murdoch for 3 weeks, and then he moves on to the next promotion or territory or country. Also, I found interesting, and I'd love to know what this reveal was next week, as Jim Ross says that Jim Crockett will have a huge announcement next week about a major star coming to the NWA. Do we know who this is?
We don't. I did not look it up.
I mean, it's the wrong year for it to be the Ding Dongs.
It is the wrong year. That would be the early 90s. Yeah, no, this is I don't know who that would be. Unless it was did Ricky Steamboat return around this time?
Maybe. I guess this would have been late 88, so possibly I'd have to go back and look. I mean, the timeline is about the only person I could think of that would make sense. We also have Bob Caudle, I thought, hinting very strongly that Junkyard Dog was going to be coming in the team with Dick Murdoch, but then seems to be dropped minutes later because everything coming out of this match, which there's not much, it's, Dick Murdoch doing cool Dick Murdoch things. He locks on a Fujiwara armbar. He hits a nasty brainbuster. Then he's cutting a promo ringside with Dusty Rhodes, and the Texas Outlaws are back together as baby faces.
A couple of things I did want to talk about in this match. So Dick Murdoch does take him outside and hit him with a chair for no reason. Outside, I always love Dick Murdoch.
Ragdolling the Isley brother.
And then back inside, that brainbuster was a long delayed brainbuster before killing Mr. Isley with it. And Bob Caudle interviews Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch, like you mentioned, and here they are talking about that upcoming U.S. Tag Team title tournament.
Dusty Rhodes, Captain Redneck, Dick Murdoch. Dick, we've been talking about the Mid-South area, and that all of the friends of you and the Dream here going to have a chance to see you back in the Mid-South pretty soon.
Well, let's get one thing quick, Bob Caudle. Psycho Herbert Coleman of Canyon, Texas said, with Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch back together, the original Texas Outlaws, there is not a tag team combination safe in the world today. And we are going to make a swing through the Mid-South. I'm talking about Little Rock, Baton Rouge, Greenwood, New Orleans, Pat O'Brien's, and Bourbon Street. And some of the greatest wrestling fans in the world are down there. There's been a lot of history made that part of the United States. And I'll guarantee you what, Gary Hart, Kevin Sullivan, Al Perez, and the rest of you, in those non-colored matches or whether it's tag team combinations, Dick Murdoch is going to be right there along with Dusty Rhodes. I'll guarantee you what, there's going to be pandemonium and mayhem break loose, and we are going to be chaos and part of it.
Well, I know you're ready, Dusty, now.
Well, I'm telling you what, I'm ready all the time. Live in color, Dick Murdoch laid it on the line. When the Texas Outlaws came back together, there was nothing safe. There was not a man, woman, or child on the face of the earth safe. Now then, the Midnight Express. When I'm through with this dog collar situation, let me tell you something, baby. If you still got them world tag team titles around your waist, me and the captain are going to take them from you, baby. We're going to, and oh, my Lord, did you see Mr. Bigelow, the beast from the east out here, telling Jim Cornette about his mama? Woo! About your mama, baby. You better look out. You better watch out. Because now then, the National Wrestling Alliance becomes awesome in the fall of 1988. And yes. Kevin Sullivan, dog collar around your neck, a dog collar around my neck, and the baddest dog of them all watching my back, Jack. And that's when it's funky like a monkey.
All right, there you have it, fans. The American Dream, Captain Redneck, Dick Murdoch, Larry Zbyszko.
Please tell me that you played this promo to the very end.
Of course.
Which
I couldn't
Dusty
figure out.
Rhodes?
There's no way we could describe what Dusty was doing there. We had to play it for the audience.
At the end, yes. He was out of his mind, insane at the end of this promo.
Weird.
Like, even by Dusty Rhodes standards, he was just on another planet. And I'm not saying like this was a great promo. He was just, his brain was operating in a different universe from the rest of us.
So yeah, Rhodes and Murdoch back together. Now, you want to go from the charisma of Dusty Rhodes to the lack of charisma for Al Perez, another person who we do not care for on this podcast.
No, Al Perez fresh off of his run as the World Class Championship Wrestling World Champion in the moribund days of that territory. He's now here at least more correctly slotted as like a lower mid-card guy. We were promised going into the break before this, we were promised that it was going to be Al Perez teaming with Larry Zbyszko. Instead, it is just an Al Perez singles match. He was awful in this match. Outside of his crazy Canadian backbreaker spinning powerbomb move, he had no instincts at all. He hits the guy with a German. The guy can't keep his shoulder down, so the German suplex just ends. He hits the Canadian backbreaker airplane spin powerbomb. He does it a second time, but the guy's in the ropes. He doesn't make any effort to pull his opponent out of the ropes. He just looks confused. And then he
looks like he goes and goes for this pin with the guy in the ropes and looks at like the cameraman at ringside, like he's doing the end of match pose here. And the ref's like, dude, he's in the ropes. I can't count this. It's ridiculous.
He appears as though he does not know the rules of wrestling. And I'm pretty sure as someone who grew up on World Class Championship Wrestling, it was the first wrestling I saw with my own eyes as a 3-year-old. I remember them enforcing rope breaks. You could not pin a guy in the ropes. So Al Perez had just come from a territory as their world champion, the standard bearer, and he did not know that you could not pin a man while he was in the ropes. This was so strange, and then he gets the win with the Dory Funk spinning toe hold.
Yeah, the best part of this match is Gary Hart, his manager at ringside, giving the sign for the spinning toe hold.
While chomping on a stogie.
While having, his cigar, and he's just like, the way Gary Hart gives the sign for the spinning toe hold, best part of the match.
Yes.
Nonchalant.
No wrestler has ever needed a manager and a specific manager more than Al Perez needed Gary Hart.
Yes, he defeated Trent Knight was the jobber in question here. Afterward, Gary Hart cuts a promo saying that Al Perez will be teaming with Larry Zbyszko, who may or may not have been the Western States Heritage Champion.
He was. Gary Hart pointed out he's the very prestigious Western States Heritage Champion, which hopefully I live to be into my 70s, into my 80s. I will probably on my deathbed think about how absurd the Western States Heritage Championship was, particularly in a territory and a promotion that didn't run out west very often, and how even now in modern times, whenever a company introduces like 1 or 3 or 10 too many titles, I always think, oh, that's their Western States Heritage title.
Yes, this was so they are going to go and compete for the vacant U.S. tag team titles. And at that point, the show goes off the air. Credits start rolling, and we're done with an episode of NWA Pro Wrestling.
We should mention we didn't play the Gary Hart promo just because it's not bad, but there's just not a whole lot to it. He's trying to make you think that Al Perez and Larry Zbyszko are a threat, but he also... when I'm watching this and listening to this promo, I take it as Gary Hart knows sort of the credibility that he has as a manager of scary, imposing men. And I feel like he knows there's only so far he can go in really going hard on these guys being like guys that are going to hurt you, guys that are going to take you out, guys you better be afraid of. It's Larry Zbyszko and Al Perez. You're going to wrestle them. There's a good chance you're going to beat them. And you're going to move on.
Yeah, very true. And with that, the show is over. This was an easy watch. Yeah. Significantly easier than week 1's TNA pay-per-view.
And not just because it was 1/3 the length. You could take any 1-hour portion of the TNA pay-per-view. Was it Victory Road? They're all Victory Road.
It was still against all odds.
Road. Yeah. TNA runs Victory Road every month. Against all odds, 2008. Any 1-hour segment of that show. there's no way it would be as easy to watch as this was. Like there was nothing amazing on this, nothing even approaching a good or great match, but it was just characters, mostly who were over, doing promos, doing squashes. You had great announcers. Like, my God, not to constantly go back to the previous episode of this podcast, but the juxtaposition of Mike Tenay and Don West, who I generally like, but they're just incessant screaming on that show, never letting anything breathe, compared to Jim Ross and Bob Caudle, who were great and got fired up when there were a few times to get fired up, but otherwise, like, they were guiding you through an hour of professional wrestling, and it just felt easy. And I wasn't annoyed. I wasn't exhausted. I didn't feel like I needed Advil or Xanax or a gummy at any point during the show. It just was a good hour of pro wrestling, and I was interested to see where things would be going if we were continuing to watch any of these 6 weekly NWA television shows.
Favorite thing for you on this episode?
Oh man, it's always hard for me, particularly on a show that there isn't a lot remarkable that happens. On a show that prime Jim Ross is commentating, it's hard for me not to say Jim Ross or Bob Caudle here, but I would honestly say the best thing on this show was like the first minute of the show.
We open with JJ, Windham, and Sting. That was my favorite thing, followed by Bam Bam Bigelow.
I would agree on both of those. And also a great Ric Flair promo that was like, for anyone else, any other wrestler in the business, that would have been the best promo of their life. For Ric Flair, it was just average. It was just a Thursday in Winston-Salem or wherever this was taped. Like, it was just a Ric Flair promo, but that was great. But yeah, I would say the opening segment, everybody was awesome in it. Barry was great. JJ Dillon, maybe the most entertaining JJ Dillon we've ever seen, and that's a high bar. Sting being Sting. Yeah, I enjoyed that. It set the tone for a fun show.
Worst thing on this show?
Al Perez.
Al Perez is always the worst thing on this show. And I will also say the Louisville Slugger set.
Yes.
Was also horrendous. The chairs were so bad.
I will say that I found something I find less interesting and more objectionable than Al Perez.
Yes.
And it is those chairs. Al Perez is kind of my Greg the Hammer Valentine, but those chairs are worse. The other thing that's amazing as we get ready to close this out is that you could have a show that was so far on the opposite ends of the spectrum when it came to aesthetics. You had those chairs that those men sat in on that interview segment, but then you had the beautiful ring skirt, the apron of this classic, NWA look. They missed on that set, and they missed on the lighting of that set.
And with that, we're going to call it a podcast. The best way for you to interact with the show, and we love to hear from you, your memories of this stuff, your things that, and no matter where you are in whatever season, send us a message. We love it. Twitter is the best way to do that, at Wrestle at Random. Same for Instagram. The DMs are open. Go ahead and send us an email if you stay off of social media. You can do that, wrestlingatrandom@gmail.com. And of course, the best way to support this show, you can do it in 2 ways. One is telling your wrestling fan friends about the show. Show them how to subscribe to a podcast. Or go ahead and if you really want to support the show, you become a patron of the show. And that's done at patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom, or whatever paywall we're currently behind at the time you're listening to this recording, as this is always evergreen content. Also, Apple Podcasts is another way you could get all of that bonus content right in the app if you're listening on your Apple Podcast app. It's
super
right there.
Easy if you don't want to mess around with Patreon, if you don't want to worry about tiers, any of that stuff. If you want to have everything all in the same place, if you're an Apple Podcast listener, just tap on the bonus content, subscribe, and then it's all there. And as you always say, when you do that, whether it be via Apple Podcasts or via Patreon, it immediately unlocks not just the most recent episode of the bonus feed, but every episode we've done up until that point. So let's say, you want to support the podcast, you want to spend your $5, support us. You can do that. You can unlock all those shows, download them, and then maybe obviously we'd love to have you every month, but you could do that just for 1 month and get all that content if that's all you can afford. We don't mind that. We have no problem with that.
Yeah, but what's going to happen is you're going to say, hey, you know what? Wait, there's another tier where you can request stuff. You can be the
Yes.
randomizer. You can be the intentionalizer.
Can you splice in right now Dusty Rhodes end of that promo just to say yes?
Yeah.
Just to emphasize this.
Yes, you can. And you can bump yourself up to the tier that allows you to pick a show, send us a message, tell us what you want us to watch. We watch it, we review it, and then you can bump yourself back down to that lower tier, continue to get all of that bonus content.
And
or
we will watch anything as long as it's
minimum
10
10 years.
As long as it's 10 years or older, that's the only caveat. That's the only guideline we have. Otherwise, it can be the best match you ever saw. It can be the worst show you ever saw. It could be the most obscure thing that you found that you want someone else to watch and you want to hear what someone else has to say about it because you're pretty sure you're the only person who's ever seen it before. All those things totally open, available, and we're ready to watch.
Yeah, we also have t-shirts available. I'm wearing one right now.
You are.
The Wrestling at Random shirts are available.
One of the only wrestling shirts that I feel is completely acceptable to wear in public. I've worn it to concerts at small clubs and dive bars and have never felt out of place, which honestly, that is probably the only wrestling shirt I own of the many that I do that I would feel comfortable wearing at a concert, on a date, any of those things, any of them.
Yeah, so all those are ways to support the show. We appreciate it. We couldn't do it without each and every one of you helping us out, keeping the lights on, and we come back to continue to do it and continue to grow this show thanks to you. So with that,
you don't want, by the way, you said keep the lights on. You need to support the podcast. Otherwise, we might end up looking as dark and dingy as the Louisville Slugger segment.
That's right.
We won't have those chairs, no matter how bad things get. We will not have those chairs, but make sure you keep the lights on.
And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you, NWA Pro from 1988 for getting the taste of TNA not Victory Road 2008 out of our mouths. This was much needed. We'll see what the randomizer has for us next week.
I want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.